Hi. Wanted to share some thoughts with you this morning about family patterns, how things have changed through the generations, particularly around the topic of parenting. And you can look at this in several different ways. I'm looking at it as how I grew up, how my parents, how their culture, where they lived, what country they lived in, my grandparents, great grandparents, how that shaped how everybody parented in every generation. But I can also look at it from a European perspective, particularly a Dutch perspective, looking at how their culture and their parenting and their experiences on a collective scale have contributed to how they parent, which on some levels has been different than the way Americans parent. So you can look at this from multiple perspectives, depending on what your family history is. And if you have stories or things that go back, into the country of origin, if your family is a more recent immigrant, then that would be also interesting to compare. And as I was thinking about this yesterday, and I was going to make a video about it, but I got distracted running to and from ball games most of the day. And by the time I got home, I just was not in a space that I could talk about it. But what was very interesting to me is a lot of the parents I was speaking to at the game about our kids and what we're going through right now and how they're getting ready to go back to school and all of these things are happening, choices they're making, choices we're making, they were all echoing things I was going to be talking about. And we did have some interesting conversation about how our parents raised us, how our grandparents raised their children. What were the beliefs? What were the times like? Because even in this time where technology rules, I can see a big difference in the way my oldest is versus my twins. And a lot of the moms that I was talking to yesterday have an older child and then maybe some younger children. So the age gaps are somewhat similar, and they were also seeing similar things. When our oldest children were born, there was a certain belief about parenting. There was a certain way you should be doing it, if we bought into that, and a lot of us did. And then as education changed, especially by the time my oldest was in 3rd and 4th grade, and then my twins were starting school, it was a whole different ballgame. And a lot of us saw through some of it at the time, but it hasn't been, I think, until the last several years that more people are seeing through, like what is actually happening and why are the children this way at this point in the reality on the planet. So it made me think a lot about, okay, just as an example, my family. My parents grew up in the Chicago area. Okay, they were still living in somewhat Czech neighborhoods as they grew up. And as a lot of people in big cities, as we study family history, we know that when immigration began, and even through a good part of the 20th century, when they came over from Europe, in this example, they moved often to a place where their people already were. You see it with every ethnic group. Okay, so they shared similar values, similar beliefs, and then they assimilated and they changed and had children, and lives became more Americanized. Belief system changed. Technologies came in. Wars came in. So if I were to look at my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, even going back to my 2 times great-grandparents, and look at just from, we'll say 1900 until now, my 2 times great-grandparents lived through World War I. They lost a son. They saw some new technology come in after that. They saw the world change. Financial systems changed. All kinds of things were different. Then my great-grandparents lived through World War II. And we know after World War II, the whole planet changed. The propaganda and programming at the time was basically, no matter where you lived, rebuild, get married, have children, go live the dream. And if you were in Europe, it was a different reality because you have to actually physically rebuild most of where you were living, or you are a displaced person at this point, and now you have to create a life somewhere else, probably not in the country where you came from. And they were dealing with so many other things. And then we move, if I look at my family, from my grandparents moving out of those Czech neighborhoods, but still somewhat staying in them, and then my parents moving out of them as they got older, got married, and then maybe even moved farther away, we can look at the different patterns, the different ways we were raised. Look at how the kids used to play in the alleyways. Now you don't see a lot of kids outside because technology. And they're so stuck in watching TV and playing on their video games, a lot of them. We used to have family units that were very close-knit. Even if they didn't always get along, they still had each other's backs. Maybe, I know my parents would say, oh, we ran across the alley to grandma's house. And their parents did the same thing, or they lived with them in some cases. So it was a very different structure. We had very different patterns being passed down, very different beliefs, very different traumas based on the time period, what was happening in the collective on a historical scale, whether it was famine, dust storms, the Great Depression, wars. And it affects us today. What our parents, grandparents, what all of them went through still affects us today and contributes to how we parent. Because we also have the flip side of, I don't want to parent the way my mom did or my grandmother did, or the way maybe they didn't and I think they should have, because that's judgment. So I invite you today to maybe take out a piece of paper or get a whiteboard or a giant scribble pad or something, and just start to look at the family structures that you've grown up in. Where did they come from? What were the beliefs? How did they parent? Specifically look at how they parented and what they passed down to you, the positive and the negative. What lessons they passed that have helped you. And maybe some of the lessons you learned along the way that you're grateful you didn't have to go through the experience of whatever happened to learn that lesson. Somehow it's just shown up and made sense to you. But I think in this time of humanity, we all need to really evaluate, how are we parenting? What are we doing? Because the old rules no longer apply. Everything has changed. And my perspective is, at this point, we just need to see what's going to work now. Let go of the judgments of what we were doing and thinking, oh my gosh, I've screwed up my kids, or I didn't do enough for them, or whatever the judgment is. And just look at, okay, how can I move forward in this moment now with everything that is happening, with the choices that I have available to me now? And I think more parents are starting to step into this. But I do think too, it is helpful to go back and look at where we've come from, because history has repeated itself so many times, and a lot of us are stepping up and saying no more. But we can only have no more if we are honest and look at where we came from. And we do the inner work, and we get rid of the judgment and set the ego aside and say, okay, this looks like the best choice for me right now. This looks like the best choice to raise my kid right now. So I invite you to sit with that today. And if that resonates with you, please let me know, because it was very interesting yesterday to have conversations with a lot of different people, and they were all echoing these things that I was ready to put into a video like this. And I even told them that. So the collective is waking up, and we are asking more questions, and we really are looking at ourselves. And I can tell you, because I've been looking at this a lot, especially the last year and a half, a lot of guilt can come up over what we have made as choices in the past, and how they've affected our kids, how they've affected us as a family unit, whatever that means for you. We just have to set that aside. Just let it go. Because everybody, whether it's us, our parents, our grandparents, we all did the best we could in that moment with the knowledge we had and with the layers of trauma that we had on top of us, where we couldn't see the other possibilities. So I'd love to hear what you think about this. And if you have been thinking about this, talking with friends about it, family members, And what things have you changed over the last year and a half in the way you parent? Or what things are you now questioning that you weren't before? And how maybe are you going to start moving forward in a completely different way? Because these times almost demand it. We have to create something new. Love to hear from you. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.